New Zealand? Well, this is breaking news on a Sunday afternoon, so Simon and I have had to interrupt our naps to bring you this breaking news. And it is this: Alfred Ngaro, previously National Cabinet Minister and then leader of NewZeal, has joined New Zealand First and has announced he is standing at the upcoming election for New Zealand First. Afternoon to you, Simon. Sorry to interrupt, but this is quite big news, isn't it?
I think it is very significant news, though I want to say for the record, I was not having a nap. I was actually having a delightful catch up with my family, siblings, and mother. But this is actually very significant news that a former National Cabinet Minister, obviously pushed out of National a number of years ago, has chosen another party. So, yeah, very significant news, Bob.
Okay, well, let's listen to just his lead-in to the announcement. This was at the New Zealand First Conference. His job was to introduce Winston Peters to bring the State of the Nation speech. This is a little bit of what Alfred Ngaro said.
New Zealand was built on a pioneering spirit. We climbed the highest mountains, we split the atom, and yes, we even gave the world pavlova. But more than that, we built communities, we built trust, we built a country where people believed that they belonged. But you, like many others, New Zealanders, are asking a simple question today: what has changed? Because something has. You see it in the pressure their families are under. You hear it in the questions parents are asking. You feel it in the uncertainty that many young people carry, and you see it in the public conversation and discourse that has become more divided and less certain of what it stands for. Because somewhere along the way, the moral line that once gave us clarity has been blurred. What was once understood is now debated. What was once steady now feels uncertain. And when a nation loses clarity around what is right and what is not, it doesn't just affect public policy, it affects people, it affects families, and it affects the way that we relate to one another. And over time, it begins to erode the very foundations that hold our societies together. So because I believe that the core convictions that have shaped my journey are also reflected within New Zealand First, I want to announce today that I intend to stand as a candidate for New Zealand First.
All right, there's a little bit more to, I just want to cover a little bit more of his speech because I think it'll warm the hearts of many who are listening. I did note, Simon, that about the only thing that Alfred did wrong was he didn't say who he was when he got up. He probably thought that everyone knew who he was, and probably everybody in the room did, but there was somebody with a loud voice and yelled out, who are you? And so, of course, that was immediately a chance for the New Zealand Herald to jump on it to say Ngaro forgot to introduce himself and had to remind the crowd who he was. Well, he didn't have to remind the crowd. He just had to tell one particular noisy person who maybe was just there for the free feed. Anyway, there's probably a couple of angles we can go down on this. I was thinking, is this indicative of more social conservatives leading the Nats, National Party? What does this mean for Christian parties? What does this mean for the vote for New Zealand First? Will they see an immediate bounce? So perhaps we can cover any of those three topics. You choose which one you want to start on, Simon, and I'll follow.
Well, can I just make a quick comment on what you just said around where the media is running with this? I mean, Alfred, look, I know Alfred. He's a friend, someone I have enormous respect for. And the fact that the media have gone after the one silly little comment is just so indicative of mainstream media today. I remember being in select committees where you're working for hours on, quite tough topics, and one person says one stupid thing or drops the F-bomb, which is not a good thing to do. And that's the headline. And, this is the stupidity already around Alfred. Look, I just start with this comment. This is not the likes of Alfred leaving National, because I know other former MPs like Haritia Pango have moved as well. A lot of National supporters I come across on the streets all around New Zealand are now moving to the likes of New Zealand First. But this is the really important point, Bob. They feel that Nationals left them. And I actually don't think that's incorrect. I mean, over the last few years, the National Party has effectively pushed out its conservative base. You know, Alfred was effectively pushed out of National, which was exceptionally sad. He's an incredible man. His insights, his experience, his ability to speak, to engage, to get to the Pacifica community. Bear in mind, there is no representation in the National Party on the Pacifica side at the moment. None whatsoever. And so this is, again, significant for New Zealand First. This is a leader, you know, Alfred Cook Islander, but represents the wider Pacifica community. He's gone to New Zealand First. So again, I suppose my core point, and now to throw it back to you, is National has left the likes of Alfred rather than Alfred leaving National.
So just remind us, for those who may not be aware, Hereti Hapango, she was a list MP for Whanganui, I think it was. If I remember
she
right.
actually won. She had won her seat. Yeah, she replaced Chester Burrows. Short career, but you know, didn't get to the heights, if you will, of Alfred. But she's another National MP who's moved parties. Jackie Blue, granted the name from, you know, a few years past, long-serving National MP, one who actually pushed for Herceptin to be funded for women with breast cancer. She's now joined the top party. Joanne Hayes, Grant hasn't changed parties, but has been part of this People's Select Committee around the pay equity debacle. I mean, you are seeing quite a number of former National MPs, again, I would stress, not leaving the party. They've remained where they are, but are now saying National does not represent them.
Okay, and I think Hereti Hapango, if I remember rightly, very good voting record, socially conservative, I think was good on the euthanasia issue and also on the abortion issue, very pro-life. But I think I remember she got in trouble because she dared to go and talk to some people who were against the mandates or against the vax, and sort of got hauled on the coals on that. But I guess the big question is, if Alfred, if these social conservatives are leaving National, are we going to see what we're seeing in the UK and in Australia with social conservative MPs leaving these kind of the major parties and going to the likes of One Nation in Australia and going to reform in the UK? I mean, is this the start of it?
Probably not so much in the New Zealand context, simply because we don't have that many, if you will, conservative MPs in the Parliament. Look, to be a little bit crude or simple about it, Bob, there ain't many left to move. And those who might flirt with it probably are feeling pretty comfortable where they are. So no, is there maybe the quickest way to say, I don't expect to see a reform or a One Nation type dynamic here, simply because we're so small. When you look at the UK, as you look at Australia, you have literally hundreds and hundreds of MPs. Right? The UK Parliament has 600 of them. So it's easier, if you will, or more noticeable when a few do switch. Here, well, 120, tightly controlled within the party. But the fundamental point is, by and large, across the two main parties, National and Labour, those who are more conservative or hold Christian views have been basically pushed out, and those who remain are, by and large, silenced by the system.
Okay, so I guess watch this space in terms of National. I am watching very closely who they're putting in as candidates, and a couple of seats that are safe National seats and have been held, I guess you could say, sort of close to social conservatives, which of course is Judith Collins in Papakura, which is just down the road from me, and also Bailey, what's his first name?
Andrew Bailey.
Andrew Bailey in Hunua. And that, once again, that's a safe seat. He's retiring, so who's going to replace him? And I'm watching those two seats very closely, and I guess we'll watch the list as well, just to see how far or far down the list social conservatives are. What about for New Zealand First? Are they going to get a big kick in the polls in terms of numbers in the next one? Is this going to play well that they've sort of brought in an ex-cabinet? You know, they've brought in Shane Jones from the cabinet of Labour. Now they've brought in Alfred Ngaro, cabinet from National. That's got to kind of increase their diversity.
I don't think you'll see much of a shift in the polls in the short term. But someone like Alfred, he is well experienced, very charismatic, actually a very gifted speaker and a big heart. And over the coming weeks and months, as he represents New Zealand First to the Christian community at large, certainly into the Pacifica community, I think you will see him drawing more and more people in. He will certainly draw votes off National. So that is going to happen, I have no doubt. But I don't think you'll see an immediate jump in the polls. Simply, it's not that much of an earthquake, and that's no disrespect to any of them. But he is someone who is known within the Pacifica community, is known within the wider Christian community, and has had his followers within, in this case, the national circle, who are now going to go, oh, well, if he's switched sides, gone somewhere else, we will too.
Okay. Yeah, I would expect, well, I guess, look at the NewZeal. I mean, NewZeal, the party that he was leader of, which sort of came under the Christian banner, in fact, they were the last Christian party on the block at the last election, and yet they polled the highest of all the Christian parties. It was still less than 1%, I think, in the overall vote. But every percentage point is very important when it comes to these minor parties. In fact, I heard some commentary today saying that New Zealand First, for the first time, has bucked the trend where a minor party who's part of the government, they've actually improved their percentage. I need to think that through a little bit, because I think actually, no, ACT have gone down in their ratings, actually. So, yeah, it would be. New Zealand First have actually bucked the trend, whereas, and everybody's watching this, and this is part of this worldwide trend in terms of the UK and Australia, of these minor parties who are going back to some of the basics of nationhood, concerns about uncontrolled immigration without thinking through some of the consequences and the assimilation, and also ones who are talking about the cultural DNA of the country, Judeo-Christian. In fact, I have the speech notes of Winston Peters, and he does talk about the Judeo-Christian values. I do want to show a little bit more of Alfred's speech, but what do you think? Is Alfred going to drag across a percentage of the Christian vote now? Let's talk about the Christian parties. What's the implication for that?
Look, I think he will. He's well known within the Christian community, well respected. The fact is, he was able to create a new political party, NewZeal, to attract votes. I would say many, not all, but many of those votes will come with him. And I suspect there'll be a number of others who have voted for other Christian parties who go, okay, my vote's not going to be as effective voting there, but actually if I vote, in this case, for someone like New Zealand First, I'll get an Alfred Ngaro, who at least will be in the parliament. We assume, we have to see his list ranking, and we'll go, that's a more effective way. So no, I think this is a win for Alfred. This is certainly an avenue back to parliament for him. Depending on what his list ranking is, we have to find out about that. But it's a win for New Zealand First, because they're now going to tap via him into that Christian vote, for people to go, okay, I like this particular Christian party, but I'm going to vote for the party that Alfred's in, because he'll get in, he'll be in parliament, he'll be my voice.
Yeah, it would be fair to say that NewZeal was predominantly Alfred Ngaro. In fact, I think if we did a poll and asked who else was on the list, maybe they might know Paul Adams, who's well known in the Christian community, but maybe one or two others. But in general, it was the charisma, the X factor of Alfred Ngaro, a little bit like the X factor of New Zealand First. Now, that's the interesting question, I think, is you've got three strong characters now at the top of New Zealand First. You've got Winston Peters, Shane Jones, and now Alfred Ngaro. Is that, I mean, you've been in politics for 12 years in Parliament. Is that a recipe for disaster when you've got three strong characters like that in a party?
Look, potentially. I don't think it will be. I mean, at the end of the day, Winston's a wily old fox. He's been around a lot, and he knows how to manage personalities and keep things in check. But yes, these are three strong personalities, three who like to be out front, who like to be in front of the cameras. But I think they'll make it work. There could be a few teething issues, but they'll make it work. And I have no doubt that all three of them have thought about this already. So yeah, is it a recipe for disaster? No, I don't think so. But there could well be a few tensions, a few bumps along the way as, you know, well, perhaps, as Alfred's trying to find his place and maybe he steps on Winston's toes and so forth.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, Bob, there's still a hierarchy within any political party, and that will probably come to the fore if required.
Okay, I do want to ask you what advice you'd have for Alfred now that he's announced it and it's public knowledge. But just before I do, just very exciting is tomorrow night we will be discussing this more. And Christine Rankin and Rodney Hyde are both on the panel, and Mel Taylor. All three of them have stood for political parties. Rodney, obviously, long time in politics. So you and I will sit back and listen to these three and see what their opinion is of all of this as well. But in terms of your experience in Parliament, what would be your advice to Alfred now? He's jumped ship. So there's going to be some interesting, he's got some close friends still in the National Party. I don't know if he was at Mark Mitchell's wedding on Friday, as many people were, apparently. I wasn't invited. Maybe you weren't. But is that going to be interesting when Alfred Ngaro, if New Zealand First continue polling, Alfred Ngaro is going to be in Parliament in November. How awkward is that going to be?
It'll be a little bit awkward, but actually, by and large, it will be managed. There will be the public to and fro, and probably the odd jibe, but in the quieter corridors, it'll be fine. It still will be slightly awkward. Parliament is a very tribal environment. And in Alfred's case, moving to New Zealand First is a slap in the face, in the same way as Ian Lees-Galloway, former Labour minister, going to TOP is a slap in the face. But I think, by and large, the National MPs will take it in stride. I suspect there is a couple who will be quietly praising him and going, good on you, mate, because there is disquiet within National over some of the MPs around the direction that the party is going. And you asked just briefly earlier, the advice to Alfred is just be himself. He and I would both be able to say, when you're in a political party, particularly the bigger ones, it's sometimes hard to stand up as firmly as you want on the issues that are important to you. And now that he's in a smaller party like New Zealand First, and where its values align, I think he will be able to speak strongly and confidently into the issues that he believes in. And I think we as a country will be better for that, and he'll be happier for that. Alfred being Alfred is going to be an absolute delight.
Okay, if you just joined us, the breaking news this afternoon is that Alfred Ngaro has announced that he's going to be standing for New Zealand First at the election in November. I guess the slightly awkward question, Simon, is what does this mean for NewZeal? I guess just from my own perspective, I guess this means they have to figure out, okay, do we continue to try and stand candidates without Alfred, which I think both you and I have identified. That's going to be a big uphill battle because Alfred was NewZeal and NewZeal was Alfred to a massive extent. A little bit like, look, people may say, oh, that's a bit harsh, but it's the same with Winston Peters. If Winston Peters wasn't part of New Zealand First would have a much bigger battle, and dare I say even ACT Party as well without David Seymour. So, what does this mean? Well, what's your advice to NewZeal? And also, what's your advice? These are two actually massive questions. Your advice to NewZeal and your advice to Christian voters, because a lot of people who feel they want a Christian voice, not Christian nationalism, but simply a Christian voice, someone with Judeo-Christian values batting for our side in public policy that affects families. No, that is not Christian nationalism. For those people, do they then follow Alfred and go to a party that's not diehard Christian, New Zealand first, but reflects a lot of the values? Or do they continue to battle for the Christian parties? Sorry to give you such a loaded question on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah. Whew. I won't be turning up for tomorrow's Monday meeting. I'll be recovering. Look, I can't give advice to a political party like NewZeal, but I think it's a relatively new party, and it was a party of Alfred Ngaro. So I suspect its time is probably over. In some ways, you could argue, Bob, it's achieved its purpose. In this case, its leader is arguably now in a position to return to Parliament, just not with its branding. That's not advice. The board will have to make its decision. I better add, I have nothing to do with NewZeal. I know a few of the people, but I've had nothing to do with it. So again, I can't formally advise them. I mean, around the Christian vote, look, on one side, having someone like Alfred in New Zealand First does mean you're going to get a strong Christian voice into a political party, influencing its decisions. It won't be as perfect as people want, but I suppose the litmus test is we have many months to go before the election. What influence is Alfred having into New Zealand First? There's a lot of its issues as it talks into issues of, what is a woman, for example, its support into a whole array of other areas is encouraging. But I suppose it's a matter of seeing what is the influence that Alfred has. And so my next and last comment really comes down to where people choose to vote is up to them. But, if Alfred in New Zealand First is beginning to, bring about some change, to bring a particular conservative or a Christian, to be honest, just a well thought out rational position on various topics which appeal to people, that's probably a more effective way to go than actually just voting after a party which you might align with, but basically has little to no chance on current polls than actually getting into Parliament. Because you've written a wonderful open letter, Bob, and you know it better than I because you wrote it. But to get to 5% is exceptionally difficult, and no Christian party since MMP has started has effectively achieved that. We can debate United Future, but it's a very difficult task.
Okay, look, I do just want to show you a little bit more of Alfred Ngaro's speech where he announced that he was going to be a candidate for New Zealand First, and I think you'll find that a lot of what he says here is music to our ears. In fact, people might say I wrote the speech, but I didn't, but it's a very good speech.
So the question is not simply, what do we fix? The deeper question is, who are we as a nation and as a people, and what are we building for? And that is where hope begins. You see, the vision from this party and from its leader is simple. It's about families being strengthened, parents being respected and asked for their voice of consent. Children are given both care and clarity. Young people are equipped and not just educated. Communities are connected and people feel like they belong. When I speak about strengthening families, I want to be part of this team, to lend my own experiences in building strong communities. In my early days in working in community, I helped lead fathering initiatives where men who had never been shown what it meant to be present as a dad were created spaces where they could tell their stories, the good, the bad, and the broken, and begin rebuilding their role in children's lives. Do you know what we saw? We saw the light come on of hopefulness, and it was powerful. When fathers reconnected, families strengthened. When families strengthened, communities stabilized. Because the truth is, a nation is only as strong as its homes. And right now, we cannot ignore what is happening. You see, in some cases, 1 in 20 children has no father even registered on their birth certificate. And for many others, around a third of the fathers are no longer actively involved within just a few years of their child's birth. This is not about beating down on dads. This is about giving them hope. This is about saying to our children and to our families, we need you to be strong. We need to rebuild. This is not just a statistic. That is a generation growing up without guidance, consistency, and connection. When we restore fathers, we restore the family. When we restore the family, we restore the nation. We're building from the inside out, restoring what has been lost, and strengthening what must endure. At the heart of this journey and choice to return to the political arena is something deeply personal to me, and I believe to all of us. It's a responsibility not just for today, but for those who will come after us, for our children and for our grandchildren and for the generations to come. Because if we do nothing, if we stay silent, if we sit in our armchairs and in our homes and criticize and critique, but have not stood to do what is right, then we are complicit. Our silence does not give us a way out. Because the question is not only what kind of country we inherit, but what kind of country we want to leave behind. That is why I'm stepping forward to serve and to contribute to the party of New Zealand First and to its leader, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Yeah, I don't know. I almost wonder, do you think we should invite him to speak at the Forum on the Family, maybe? Because that was music to my ears.
Look, it is. Look, that's very Alfred. These are an expression of his values, which is fantastic. The litmus test is, does that influence the policy and direction of New Zealand First? We hope it does, as I would hope it would of any person of Alfred's character being in a political party. But we just want to make sure too, and this is the deep cynic in me, that he's just not being used. Now, Alfred's no dummy. You don't want to put that across. But, you know, I've been in politics long enough. Winston is very good at saying and drawing people in to say things which are suitable, but we want to see delivery. And so some might see this as me throwing bricks, and to a slight degree it is. It's all well and good to talk about these things. We want to see actual delivery. And that has been a challenge for Winston and New Zealand First in the past. And if you don't believe me, just remember he went with Jacinda Ardern.
I was just going to ask you about that. Does he have that in the back of his mind that, look, what happens if he stands, he's elected, and Winston decides to go with Hipkins? I mean, I don't think it'll happen, and it'd be a nuclear bomb in New Zealand if it did, and Winston would lose any credibility he's got. But I don't think he would. But it could happen, couldn't it?
Like you, I don't think it will happen, but it could happen. And look, I'm not trying to scare the horses here or whatever, but, you know, for all the good elements of Winston and the things he says, and his party aligns with a lot of conservative, not all, but a lot of conservative values, Winston will ultimately do what suits Winston. And look, if that were to happen, if he chose Chris Hipkins or whoever is the leader of the Labour Party come the election, you know, the likes of Alfred and others will have to make their own choices at the time. But I think the key point for me, Bob, is words are simple, words are cheap, and words are easy. What are the actual deliverables? So as we head towards the election, you know, what are going to be New Zealand First policies into those spaces of interest to family first voters? And you know, those are very wide and broad, but we want to see actual policy. And maybe I just want to put it this way. We don't want to be misused or misled for a cheap vote. We actually want to see policies which bring about change in the way that Alfred's talking about.
Okay, I've actually got a copy of Winston's speech. I just printed it out. And this is what he said about Labour, just to reassure people, maybe. He said, when Chris Hipkins delivered his State of the Nation speech earlier this year, he said something which was quite telling. He said he was not going to announce any policy until probably around July. So what has Labour been doing for the last 2 years? In an election year, at the first meeting in front of media, he just said that Labour Party was out of ideas, that they are rudderless. That is the so-called leader of the opposition. That is the apparent government in waiting. Look, two former Labour leaders, Helen Clark and Phil Goff, are saying more on Labour policy than the current Labour leader. And he then says, unfortunately for Hipkins, New Zealanders don't forget about the disaster he delivered last time. Massive debt, massive immigration, massive increases in crime, COVID, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I think if, I just don't think Winston's going to go with Labour while Hipkins is in charge. The only thing that could possibly change that is if they rolled Hipkins and there was some other leader, and then you'd have to say, watch this space. But that would still be in advance of the election. Just in relation to the speech, he very, very briefly on the whole social engineering thing, a little bit of a comment on about being one nation, one people. And those were good words. And also just about that it's ridiculous that we've got to the state that we have to argue over whether dudes should be allowed in women's changing rooms and toilets. But apart from that, there's not a lot of the social engineering that he tends to go down. He's got into a lot of other particular areas. We'll do a bit more analysis of that and find some highlights that people need to be aware of. But I guess just finally, Simon, are there any other tricky things that are going to be issues for Alfred in this new role, do you think? Or do you think this is going to be a match made in heaven?
I think it'll be more on the positive side. I mean, this is a really good way for Alfred to get back into Parliament. This is clearly one of the motivations. I think he will be freer to be himself, and that's a happier space to be. If this does have the impact we suspect, National has very little wiggle room. It's in the low 30s. A percent or two change if they begin to lose the remainder of any of their Conservative Pacifica vote, that's going to create tensions which will be expressed in different ways. So I think, but by and large, I wouldn't say it's a match made in heaven, but it's a bold move. It's from Alfred's side. I think there's a lot of upsides, certainly upsides for New Zealand First. But I just come back to what I said earlier. Talk in some ways is cheap. We want to see actual deliverables, actual policies being promoted. And look, it doesn't surprise me that Winston is broadening out this election year. And we're not going to go into it today, but he's talking about electricity reform and other things. Winston is very good at pulling in...
Scratching the itch.
He does scratch the itch and pull in different groups. So obviously he's appealed to the vaccine hesitant group. He's now appealing to the Pacifica and Conservative group. He's certainly, appealed to those who have no time for wokeness. So he's just continuing to pull. He'll play the immigration card at some point, which ironically will pull in recent immigrants' votes. Some of the most reluctant people around immigration are those who have just migrated here, believe it or not. It's quite remarkable. So he will just keep scratching that itch. But look, we just come back. This is significant. As I said at the start, Alfred is a long-time National. He's obviously an MP for a long time. He was a minister, a cabinet minister, and he's chosen to head in a different direction with a different party. And I repeat what I said too. He will say, I can't speak for him, but he will say as others, he is not left, in this case, National. He would feel that Nationals left him and his values. And I think that's true because it's reflected in the polls.
Okay, watch this space. Look, just one other thing I want to ask you, and that is that if he was standing for National, the media would be in front of him as we speak, badgering him about his stance on abortion, euthanasia, LGBT, puberty blockers, all those moral issues. And they would be hammering him, just like they did with Christopher Luxon. I know Alfred wouldn't be backing down from any of his stances, but are the media going to badger him on what is a woman, on all those issues, the transgender issue, or is it because he's aligned with New Zealand First, they're just going to say, look, we know where he stands, we're going to gain nothing by grandstanding. In fact, we may actually give him a platform. It's going to be very different treatment by the media, isn't it?
Yeah, your question actually provides the answer. Why am I even on the show? No. But no, you're right. There's, someone like a Winston or a Shane Jones, anyone else would just, they don't even have to fully agree with Alfred's views, but they would be, look, yep, he's allowed to have them. We have a variety of views on these things. They're welcome. The problem with the major parties is they try to curate and control the views of their MPs into the ethical, moral, and conscience space, and that creates enormous tension. So you're right. If he was back with National, you'd see a huge mess because they would be delving into all of these spaces with great gusto and then running off to Luxon to get his probably very tepid response and others. And that becomes a huge story. Oh, Alfred Ngaro says this and Chris Luxon says that. And it would become a huge circus, whereas it can't with New Zealand First because they're actually quite prepared to allow it a variety of views. And I think your other point is right on the money. the more the media actually ask him around these things, and New Zealand First responds by saying he's welcome to have his views, makes them more popular. Therefore, ipso facto, the media won't do it. They won't do it because they don't want to help New Zealand First.
Okay, well, as I alluded to, we will be discussing this more tomorrow night with our panelists, and Simon and I will be joined by Christine Rankin, Rodney Hyde, and Mal Taylor. Mal Taylor's stood for Parliament with a couple of the Christian parties. Christine Rankin, obviously, with the Conservative Party, and Rodney Hyde has lots of experience with the ACT Party. So there will be more discussion tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, but we have just confirmed, we've got some little more breaking news, that Alfred Ngaro is going to be joining me live on Daybreak tomorrow morning at 7:30. And as well as that, you can ask questions. So we're going to take some questions if you want to ask Alfred some questions tomorrow morning. So that is 7:30.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Why has he chosen Daybreak on the 23rd rather than Solid Ground on the 24th? I mean, honestly, what's going on here?
Well, you know, I would like to say we gave him the choice and he chose Daybreak, but that's not true. So maybe I'll just say, look, we want to get you as soon as possible. And look, I'll be interested just to see if he says, Bob, I can't come on because I've been given the chance to be on a mainstream, you know, television breakfast show or some other mainstream show, and he thinks that might be the priority. I'm going to be really interested just to see how much media coverage he got. I mean, the most media coverage he got was this, that he didn't introduce himself and some woman in the crowd yelled out, "Who are you?" And so that was the you know, apparent breaking news. So anyway, that's what we're up about. But anyway, so there we are, 7:30 tomorrow morning. Join us, and Alfred is going to be with us for an exclusive interview. And like I say, you might have some questions which we will put to him. All right, that is it. Thank you for watching. Been quite an amazing afternoon. Interesting decision. It's going to have a lot of implications for both the election, but also possibly for who you're going to vote for and how you vote. So much more discussion on this. Thank you, Simon, for giving up, 38 minutes of your Sunday afternoon. We will note that on your next paycheck. And to the rest of you, thank you for watching. Have a great rest of the day.